The Steelers are through the bye week, which means they got a game coming up this week. Before we do that, we got to look back at those trades they made right before the deadline last week. And Ray Fittipaldo, Steelers beat writer, did a lot of looking into who they could be getting in the NFL draft with the pick that they have in the first round and their 2 second-round picks, as well as what other moves that could be made. We'll talk about that. What does the offense do without Chase Claypool, and what the coaches were talking about, what they're going to do, and the impact of William Jackson III on the Steelers defense, all right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here today with Ray Fittipaldo. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, and we are here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, breaking all things down for you on your Pittsburgh Steelers today. It's an all-Steelers show today. Remember, you can find the North Shore Drive podcast on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. If you see this video on YouTube, like the video and subscribe to our channel to get all of our Pittsburgh Post-Gazette video content. And today's episode is brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage and the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. By using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads. Just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Ray, first, before we get into my main topic here, what does one Steelers beat writer do when they get a bye week?
Rake leaves, cut the grass, go to Costco, all that sort of stuff, Chris. Nothing exciting, I can tell you that.
So you don't fly to some beach and just chill and just like look at the ocean for 2 days.
No, you got to get those NFL paychecks to do those kind of vacations.
I hear that. Okay. Bray, you wrote a very interesting piece for the weekend for the Post-Gazette about what the Steelers could get draft capital-wise. Now, just to remind people, the Steelers did make trades last week right before the deadline, trading Chase Claypool away for a Chicago Bears second-round pick, their actual second-round pick, not the one they got from the Ravens for Roquan Smith. They also traded away William Jackson, but for virtually nothing. It was a swapping of 6th and 7th round picks in 2025. Who cares about that? But the big thing is, one, I want to ask you, was that the right value for Chase Claypool? Was that more than what you expected? And what does this move do for their upcoming needs in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, listen, to get what's probably going to be an early second round pick, probably somewhere, top 40 to 44 pick. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. If you're Omar Khan, there's no way you can't do that deal. The way I look at it is Chase Claypool was the number 49 overall pick of the 2020 draft. You basically use him up for 2.5 years. You see what you have in him. You come to the realization that he is basically a number 3 receiver, and then you flip him for a draft pick that you need to rebuild your roster. And, oh, by the way, you're going to get an even higher selection than what you used to draft him originally. So for me, I think it was a great job by Omar Khan to maximize his value there. And, I think, once this thing gets going in the offseason, I know we're going to talk about this later in the show, but you got cornerback to address. If you see the way this secondary has played in the first 8 games of the season, you got O-line and D-line you got to shore up, and you got a whole host of other positions that need some attention too. So, 3 draft picks likely, in the top 45 picks or so. That's going to be key for Omar Khan and Andy Weidel as they try to rebuild this thing starting in February.
That is huge, and I think there's always the talk about what's most important in the Steelers. For years, we always talk about best player available, but if they draft anywhere near the top, like in the top 15, because again, I'm not one to think that they're going to finish with just 2-3 wins on their schedule. I don't think that they're going to have a top 4, even 5 pick. They might get in the bottom of the top 10 if they stay on their trajectory. I look at their schedule and think they got a chance here. But even if they pick at 15, you're going to have chances one to move up and go get it with that extra second round pick, and maybe you use some extra of that capital. But B, this is a position that you're not really in it. It's really in if you're the Steelers. And say you are in the top 10, you get a shot at a guy like a Will Anderson from Alabama, a Jalen Carter from Georgia, or Brian Brees, Jalen Carter and Brian Brees, of course, defensive lineman who could beef up there, or Peter Skoronski, an offensive tackle. If you're the Steelers right now, Ray, what is there a position that you're prioritizing over all else?
Well, here's the way I look at it, Chris. Let's say they get the number. I'm just going to pick a number. Let's say they get the number 8 overall pick. Okay. So you have to look at the value when you're picking in the top 10. If there's not a franchise left tackle there, then I'm probably not going to pick an offensive lineman.
Right.
You're not going to pick a center in the top 10. You're not going to pick a guard in the top 10. And there's some speculation out there. It's very early. But Skoronski, who's played left tackle, could end up being a right tackle or a guard in the NFL. So I don't know that I'm going to spend a top 10 pick on an offensive lineman if it's not a franchise type left tackle that you could plug in there for 10 to 12 years. Defensive line, yes, I would spend a top 10 pick on a defensive lineman, on an edge, maybe even a corner. The corners are kind of
they can be so up and down.
Yeah, I mean, you got Sauce Gardner this year. Everybody, go out and get Sauce Gardner. Then there's other years where Vernon Hargreaves was a top 10 pick.
He was a top pick
5-7 years ago, and he's basically been a full bust.
Yeah.
So, I would be looking at edge. I would be looking at defensive line, possibly a franchise left tackle, and after that, I think you could probably address cornerback later in the draft. You could address a lot of other positions later in the draft. But if you're picking in the top 10, Chris, you got to get an impact player. You got to get a guy who's going to come in here, be a possible all-pro, Pro Bowl type of player when you're picking that high. It doesn't happen very often. Last time they did it, they got Ben Roethlisberger. You don't want to talk about the last time they picked in the top 15, Marquise Pouncey. I mean, that's the difference between picking in the top half, top 15 of the draft, and then when the Steelers have picked 16 to 32, like they have for most of the past decade. It's a huge difference in the quality of player that you might be able to get.
Right. And also I think the difference will be here is they aren't reaching for one player. Like when they traded up to get the 10th overall pick to get Devin Bush, that was because they tried the year before to get linebackers. By the time they got to their pick, all the guys that they wanted were gone. And that was definitely a desperation pick to replace the emptiness that was left from Ryan Shazier's injury. But this is a situation, like you're right. They could look at so many different options. And I know there's probably some listeners out there that are thinking, whoa, wait, Ray, what? Wait, edge rusher? They got TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. Great. What about this? What about this? You know that you have a good shot at Will Anderson Jr. Or some of the other edge guys out there, because he's not the only one. There's Miles Murphy out of Clemson. There's Nolan Smith out of Georgia. There's Tyree Wilson at Texas Tech. There's a lot of guys out there you could put there. What if hey, we're getting one of those guys with that first round pick? And let's say Alex Highsmith finishes on a similar pace that he's been on. He gets 6.5 more sacks in the season. He finishes with 13. Then he's an edge rusher that other teams might look at and say, maybe we should be coughing up a draft pick for this guy so that we don't have to get into an auctioning war with him in free agency after next year. Is that a move you think the Steelers consider?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you saw this past week with Omar and the way he handled this trade deadline, I think anything is possible. But whenever you have a chance to get an impact playmaker at a position such as edge, which we all know is so important for this defense, and we'll see how that changes with Andy Weidel in charge of the draft. I know he's been more into interior linemen if you look at his history. So you could sort of make an argument of which direction they might go, but you're not going to turn your back on a guy like Miles Murphy or Anderson if he's there in the draft. You plug him in, you play him, and then if Alex Highsmith is here for only 4 years, then that's the way it goes. Or you flip him in a trade next offseason. I think if you do that, you're dealing from a position of strength, and you're not necessarily picking for need when you go into the draft next year. You're merely picking the best player, and then you're making your roster work from there. So that's what I'm talking about. When you pick in the top 10, there's no way at all you're ever picking for need. You're taking the best player available on that board.
And that gets you better opportunities to get hits like Ben Roethlisberger when he was picked 11th overall. I want to talk to Ray more about what these trades did to the offense, because he got a chance to speak to Matt Canada, to all the offensive assistants last week during the bye, and then we got a chance to kind of look at, like, what will the Steelers offense look like without Chase Claypool, who, as bad as the Steelers offense was, he was making some of the plays on it, that while it was being bad, especially the last couple of weeks. We'll talk about that and more in a few minutes here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Liquid Death. Liquid Death is, of course, the awesome Mountain Spring water brand that comes in a tall boy can. It's just refreshing water. It looks like it's coming out of a beer can, like a Tall Boy Miller Lite, but no, it's just water here to hydrate you. And why they call it Liquid Death? Well, Liquid Death is called that because it's here to murder your thirst, and it's here to murder plastic pollution, because 10% of all the profits from every can sold will go to fighting plastic pollution around the globe. So when you're getting Liquid Death, you're not only helping your own health with getting fresh water, you're helping the health of the planet. So do both at the same time by getting some Liquid Death right now. You can do that at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or a county fair, or find Liquid Death retailers near you with their store located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. We're also brought to you by Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice if the holidays were stress-free? At a hot tub, a swim spa, or a sauna from Valley Pool and Spa will help you feel like it is. Relax and soak in a hot tub or swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Refresh and rejuvenate in a Fittipaldo sauna that is sure to melt your stress away faster than Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and hot tubs by visiting valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, and we are of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Okay, Ray, so they traded away Chase Claypool to get you that extra second-round pick, and then you could start looking at all those draft picks. But you still have to look at this offense before you get to that draft, right? So now you're in a position where the offense has to find a way to improve. They are among the worst offenses in the NFL. They're like, right now, going into this week, they are scoring the least points per game. They're scoring 15 points per game. That is dead last. But this is a rookie quarterback. This is an offense that's looking for its identity. How does this offense move forward after giving up a playmaker in Chase Claypool right now? What are the things that you heard from the coaches?
Yeah, Mike Tallman talked about this on Wednesday before they broke for their 4-day weekend. And basically, the way he explained it is almost like a streamlining process, right? So for Kenny Pickett, you had Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Pat Freiermuth, you had George Pickens, you had all these mouths that you had to feed in that offense. And even though they weren't prolific, they struggled. By trading away Chase Claypool, you almost simplify things for your rookie quarterback. Okay, now he knows, okay, Deontay Johnson, you're my number one receiver. George Pickens, you're my number 2 receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And Pat Freiermuth, now you're the main guy inside in the slot. So people were speculating, well, Steven Sims, Miles Boykin, who's going to get those extra reps? Well, really, when you look at it, Pat Freiermuth, the tight end, he's going to get a lot of those snaps in the slot now, and they'll fill in with a Miles Boykin and a Steven Sims and maybe even a Gunnar Olszewski if they have to. So a lot of people think, oh, you're taking a weapon away from Kenny Pickett, but I'm telling you, the way the Steelers are thinking about this is it's almost making it easier for him because he knows, okay, I'm going to go to my main guys. I'm going to feed George Pickens. I'm going to feed Deontay. I'm going to feed Freiermuth, and then we'll make the offense work from there.
I feel you on that because, and Matt Canada talked about it. He said, we could, one, he also said, we want to do more complicated things. We want to do more sophisticated things, but we can't do the basics right now. And so that you can't open up the playbook if you can't do the first plays on the first pages of the playbook. And I empathize with that. I get that because that's something that you're sitting there like, yeah, you know what? How am I going to expect you to pull off, step 10 of this offense when you can't pull off step 4? So I feel him on that. But I also guess part of it is looking at the middle part of the field. And Chase Claypool was one of the guys that ran in the middle part of the field more often than others. They used his big body to go there. Has it simply been just the volume of having to worry about other things that you think has slowed things down for Kenny Pickett's progression? Because I wasn't one of the people that thought that he was going to be a superstar in his first year and just figure everything out right away. But there was one thing that he brought to the NFL was his vision of the field had been really good, and it hasn't been really good for some weeks. Is this something that legitimately does help him in his processing?
Nah, he's not seeing things overall. It's just not the middle of
Yeah.
the field. He's not seeing things on the outside either. And I had an interesting one a source at Pitt told me this early in the season before Kenny Pickett was even playing. Mark Whipple came in last season and really simplified things for that Pitt offense. You had Jordan Addison, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had the tight end that he liked, two tight ends that he liked, and then he would sprinkle it around from there. He had very much defined reads in that offense, really first and second reads, and he wasn't going much beyond that. Now, every NFL quarterback is going to have to go to 3, 4, and 5. And eventually Kenny Pickett's going to have to do that. But if the Steelers in the second half of the season can simplify things for him just a little bit and just maybe break it down to where he was a little bit more comfortable last year, and then that whole picture will develop down the road, right? Reading your progressions, your third and fourth and fifth receivers, then that's going to come with time. But I think they got to find a way to simplify things for Kenny right now. Mark Whipple did it last year, and I think Matt Canada and that offensive staff have to find a way for him to do it this year as well.
No, I feel you. And Mark Whipple did do a big part of it. And some of it was also a mix of focusing on the receivers that made a difference. Like, for example, like you said with Jordan Addison and what he did. I was covering Pitt, during that time. And the year before, Pitt's receivers had the most drops in college football. They were unreliable, and spreading it around wasn't working. But by focusing it to your best player and letting him be the guy that made plays for you, I think that gave them a chance to say, hey, you know what? Let's simplify the game. Let's get it to the playmaker, and then eventually, yeah, we'll dial up to play to Lucas Krull or Taysier Mack or some things
Right.
like that, and that allowed him to kind of be more comfortable. And maybe that is the ticket here, because frankly, one of the things that we say after every game, Ray, right now is, where are the targets to George Pickens? As good as this kid has looked, as much of a playmaker as he looks, why isn't he getting the ball? I vibe with this. I understand this, because if this means that he's getting more targets, I think it's not. It might be something that could help the offense, even though they did lose a player who could be a playmaker in Chase Claypool.
Yeah, and it's almost like Kenny Pickett has to learn how to trust his playmakers as well, because there might be he's missing open receivers. We all know that. We all look at the games afterward. He's missing guys, but there's also going to be situations when you have 6'4" George Pickens, and a guy might be running with him, but you got to know that you're going to give your guy a chance to go one-on-one and to make a play for him too. So, that's something that I think the Steelers offense has to explore as well. Talking to Mike Sullivan last week, I think this was on Tuesday, and he said Kenny Pickett's accuracy on deep balls hasn't been there. So
Yeah.
not only does he have to look at these guys more and just in his head think, okay, I'm going to give him more of a shot, he's got to be more accurate when he does take those shots. And Sullivan also said, he's got to put the ball in places in the short and the intermediate game so they get runs after the catch too. That's important. But Kenny Pickett just hasn't been as accurate as you need to be a dangerous offense down the field.
I agree with that sentiment. Now, Ray, I wanted to get your clarification on something, because there was a tweet that was sent out from our guy Andrew Filipponi at 93.7 The Fan about an interview that you had with him on there. And in the tweet, he says that a revelation that you revealed was that Mike Tomlin went all in on Matt Canada and let him hire his own offensive assistants. And he says that this is Andrew, not you. He says this is proof that Tomlin is losing his grip on things, and he says that Canada has a Canada blind spot, and he says it's making him question his ability to do his job. And he says that and also something that you did that you were said to have said on the Fan was that if you get rid of Canada, you might need to make some wholesale changes. I agree with you that whenever Canada goes, a lot of people thought it was going to be in the middle of the season. I said it probably wasn't going to be. It was probably going to happen after the season. But whenever Canada goes, I can see some wholesale changes on the offense to just get new identity behind whoever else you bring in here. But is it that uncommon for an offensive coordinator to get some say in who he gets to work with on his staff, or was that a bold move by the Steelers?
No, just go back and look at it. I went back, and looked at it, the day they hired Pat Meyer, I remember writing, Mike Tomlin better get this one right because he's now gone through 5 offensive line coaches in 5 seasons, and Pat Meyer better be the answer. So no, you go back and look at the connections. Matt Canada has worked with Eddie Faulkner in the past. He has worked with Frisman Jackson in the past. He had not worked with Pat Meyer, but Frisman Jackson had worked with Pat Meyer. So all these people are familiar with the types of things that Matt Canada wants to do with his offense. And it only stands to reason he would go to Mike and say, hey, guys, this is who I feel comfortable with. But again, Mike Tomlin is the guy who has to sign off on it and feel comfortable with those guys. The one guy that I think that they might keep, even if they do fire Matt Canada, just because of the continuity. And the offensive line hasn't played great thus far. But why would you want to go 6 offensive line coaches in 6
I agree.
If there's any redeeming qualities at all about Pat Meyer, I think he's a guy that you would maybe look to keep. And then you go from there. But I'm just saying, I don't think I didn't think it was breaking news that Matt Canada, was able to get some guys on his staff that he worked with before. I think we all heard the complaints from the 2021 season. You had Ben Roethlisberger running the offense. That wasn't the type of quarterback you wanted. Okay, now you got Kenny Pickett. You got the quarterback you want. You didn't have the types of assistant coaches who were, who were familiar with what he was doing. So we had the much publicized thing with Adrian Clem last year.
Yeah.
Leaving in the middle of the season, right? Okay. Obviously some friction there. That dynamic was not working. So, as you go along here, I think it's only natural that you give your offensive coaches guys that they can work with and want to work with. And, I don't think that was strange. I do think, just pointing out that if you do fire Matt Canada, then you are going to have to make some choices there, right? Okay, Pat Meyer, can he work with my new offensive coordinator? Frisman Jackson, do we want to start over again with receiver? Can Frisman Jackson work with a new guy too? So these are all things that Mike Tomlin is going to have to consider, in January, if indeed he does move on from Matt Canada.
No, I feel you on that. In your mind, Ray, if you were to assign percentages to it, what's the percentage that Matt Canada is the offensive coordinator of this team next season?
I mean, I can't go higher. I can't go higher than 5%, Chris.
Higher than 5? I thought you were about to say 50. I was going to say, higher than 5. So he is gone.
How do you keep him?
I'm with you. I'm not. That's not me challenging you, Ray. That's me just being like I thought you were gonna play like you were gonna play like I'm playing back. I'm gonna put some money on this number over here in roulette and this number. No, you're just saying all chips. This guy is out of here,
Chris. If you're last in scoring, if you can't run the ball any better than you ran the ball 5 years ago, if your number 1 receiver doesn't have a touchdown, which he doesn't through 8 weeks. What are we talking about?
What are we talking about?
I thought that Mike Tomlin maybe should have moved on after last season, and he brought him back. So anything is possible. Don't listen to me, but if you want a percentage from me right now, I'm going to say 5%.
My last thing on the offense before we rotate to defense, the next segment, is there a chance that the uncertainty at the quarterback position is the reason they're with Matt Canada right now in the first place? Because when Randy Fichtner was gone, right? Ben Roethlisberger was still going to be around for another year. You don't know if they're drafting a quarterback. Was that uneasiness the reason that they kind of just they almost had to go with Canada, or was it even if Ben Roethlisberger was in his prime, Canada was just going to be there anyway? There was nobody else that was coming to Pittsburgh.
I think Mike Tomlin wanted to give Matt Canada a chance to run his offense with a mobile quarterback and to see what it looked like without Ben Roethlisberger running the show. That's what I think. I mean, even though a lot of signs pointed towards things not working last season with Matt Canada, I do think Mike wanted to give him a chance. And let's say, hey, more than one season. Okay, now you got 2 full years. This is what you are after 2 years. Then I think maybe Mike or whoever makes that decision would feel more comfortable that they at least gave it, more than 1 year before you made that call.
All right. I hear you on that. You know what? I will ask one more thing. I apologize. I keep sticking with this. The theory that Mike Tomlin is only doing this for Matt Canada because Dino Tomlin went to Maryland. What's your take on that?
I mean, that was so long ago, Chris. I know there's a relationship there. And, there's probably some good feelings between the two because he gave him a shot. I know, Dino wasn't a guy. If you look back, I think, was Dino a 3-star?
He was a 3-star. He had an offer from Pitt. He had offers from Iowa State, and he chose to go to Maryland after Matt Canada was gone from there.
Yeah, so he had some other Power 5 offers, and it wasn't like he was. I know he was also like Ivy League and Patriot League, that sort of thing, before some of these other offers came. So I don't know. Maybe there are some feelings there. Maybe how that's how the relationship started. In addition to Mike getting to know him in 2016 when he was at Pitt. So deep down, is that a reason for Mike Tomlin not to fire Matt Canada? No, I don't think that's a reason, but I'm not going to deny that there's probably some
connection,
some good feelings, and some some base level connection there in the past that they both felt good about and do feel good.
Just curious there. I feel you, like there's like definitely like I know that guy, and I'm not gonna I don't hate the guy, or might even like the guy, but the people that push the narrative that like that's the only reason that Matt Canada is still around, I think that's going a little bit too far. I think there's other reasons for that. But anyways, we got to talk defense, because there was a trade on the defensive side of the ball to get a new cornerback. We'll talk about William Jackson III and Ray's outlook on that situation. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinz's in the Berg. Yinz's in the Berg. Listen up. This is the place where all you Yinzers can go get your new Pittsburgh sports gear. And look, I know it's rough. The Penguins have lost 7 straight. The Steelers are 2-6. All gloom seems tough right now. But guess what? The way to help to fight that is to show you support for your black and gold. No matter no matter what their record it is, you're sticking in with your guys through thick or thin. And the best way to do that is get some new Pittsburgh gear at Yinz's in the Berg. And it's easy to do that. Just go to their 2 strip district stores where you can find all of their legendary gear. Also, there's their online presence, yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com, where you can get all your Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more at Yinz's in the Berg at, again, yinzerspgh.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, we got to talk about the defense, because they went and got William Jackson III. Now, William Jackson III, not a Jalen Ramsey, not a pure CB1 that's going to just blanket Jamar Chase every week. But to me, this seemed like a trade. It's like, hey, Ahkello Witherspoon did not work out this week, and he hasn't worked out much this year. So let's get a guy who's healthy, can go in there, and he's not going to be shut down central, but he can bump and run with guys. He's been a top corner. You wanted him in the draft 6 years ago when he was coming up, when the Bengals traded ahead for him. What's your read on the impact that William Jackson III can realistically make for this defense?
Yeah, I mean, I just think they came to the realization that their cornerbacks weren't cutting it, and they had to make a move, to sort of stabilize things in the second half of the season. And you mentioned it at the top, Chris. It's a very low risk move, basically a waiver wire claim when you look at the compensation. 3 years down the road, and probably is never going to happen anyway. So it's a roll of the dice. We'll see if Will Jackson works out. If he does, the Steelers can maybe come to terms with him on a more reasonable contract. I don't think they're going to pay him $9.2 million in base salary that he's due next year. I don't think that's a realistic option, even if he plays great. But Levi Wallace hasn't played great. He's kind of been injured in and out of the lineup. Ahkello Witherspoon, same thing, injured. Kind of slow to come back from that hamstring injury. When he does come back, he's not very
roasted.
Good. Yeah. So I mean, I wrote about this on Sunday. You can get out from under both of those contracts with a total of $3 million in dead cap hits if you want to move on from both of those guys. So, and Cam Sutton's an unrestricted free agent after the season ends. So you have issues at cornerback one way or the other. I think the second half of the season, they got to figure out who they want to go forward with. Do you want to sign Cam Sutton to another mid-level contract, maybe with designs on him eventually becoming a slot corner, maybe not an outside corner? Do you want to do that? Or are you happy with Cam Sutton? Maybe you pay him $5 million a year again and just, you run it back with him. But I think Wallace isn't cutting it. Witherspoon isn't cutting it. We'll see if Will Jackson cuts it. But I think we talked about 3 of those picks in the top 40 next year. I think one of those definitely has to be a cornerback, Chris.
And an outside cornerback, because you know what?
Outside cornerback. You got to address that. And the only way you do that, you can't be taking flyers on
Right.
guys like
Third.
Justin Lane and
Yeah.
pick 80 or 90. You can't do that. You gotta get guys with pedigree, and those guys come in the first and second round. And for the first time since Artie Burns, I think you got to do that. But I'm not saying first round, but I'm saying once in those top 40 picks, and you got 3, I think you got to draft a corner.
No, I'm right with you. I mean, you could get a guy like, if you go super early, like South Carolina's Cam Smith, he's a guy that, he has the athleticism. He makes really good plays in the ball. You could wait later and get the guy everyone's talking about, because of the obvious connection to the Steelers, and Joey Porter Jr. for Penn State. You could probably get him in the second round. There's a lot of guys out there that you open the door to by getting that. But looking at this, I think it makes a lot of sense to keep Cam Sutton, because that dude could still play in the slot and play outside and kind of help you. And he knows your defense. And, I think he's a good tone setter, for that group. He's not the best playmaker, out there, because he drops a lot of interceptions, but he's in position. I think he's feisty. He challenges guys around the field. I think all of those things are good, but you still need a playmaker. You need a guy who can take away, who can match up with Jamar Chase and give him a hard time. And,
Right.
William Jackson III, I think, is better than a Keller Witherspoon at that, because I think he bumps and runs a lot better. Well, I was talking to guys who have, watched him with the Washington Commanders and watched how he's grown as a player. And I think there's a sense that, like, he can bump and run better. He's not a good zone corner, but, he's going to give you that aspect of it. But you need a guy who does everything. And that might be the answer in the draft in the long run. But I think the biggest concern that everyone has is this the week that TJ Watt finally comes back, Ray? Jerry Dulac reported on that, earlier in the year. He said that's when he's coming back. Yeah. Is it the week that he comes back, Ray? And do we see an immediate impact with him being back on the field against the Saints?
Oh yeah, he's coming back, and TJ is going to come back close to 100%. So I think you're going to get the full TJ Watt, and that's going to be a huge thing for that pass rush, right? I mean, Alex Highsmith is going to be better. Cam Hayward's going to be better. All those guys in the front are going to be better because of TJ's presence. And let me just go back to the secondary for one thing.
Sure.
It happened. TJ got injured, and one positive that might come out of this is you go into the offseason now knowing, okay, we saw what our corners look like without a pass rush. Maybe last season you look at the Witherspoon signing, you're like, he played pretty well.
Right.
He got some turnovers, right? Let's see what he can do again. Now your corners are not good enough. So you go out, hey, let's see. Next season, the pass rush is back to what it is. You still go and add a playmaker that's going to make your defense that much better. You're not going to be fooled by any of those guys anymore. So that's the one positive that comes out of this TJ injury. I think it really put a spotlight on how I don't want to say how bad their corners are, but how they can improve in that area. I think that's one good thing that came out of this TJ Watt injury.
I think it's certainly something to look at. Like you said, they got to test these guys, see how do you do when the best edge rusher in football and maybe the best defensive player in football is right there creating play. How do you do when he's not in the lineup, and then how do you do when he's back in the lineup? I think that's certainly a concern. That's something that you could take out of this. And again, for Cam Sutton, he was probably the one guy who did not falter as much in this situation. A lot of teams tried to go at him. He, statistically, when you look at Pro Football Focus and their charting of, targets and completions allowed and what was allowed after that, Cam Sutton's the best of that group. And to me, like, that's a veteran. You've drafted him, you've developed him. He's been in your locker room. If I'm Mike Tomlin and I'm Omar Khan and I know I'm drafting a young cornerback to come up in this defense, it might help having a guy like that who's been part of this defense to kind of help that guy bring himself along.
I agree. And there's probably a price that they have in mind for him. He's making $4.5 million the last 2 years. They're probably going to have him right in that $5 to $6 million range again. And listen, somebody might come out and knock his socks off with an offer.
They might. It happens.
He didn't go to free agency last year, right? He was one of these guys who signed, I think, 2 or 3 days before free agency began. So we'll see what he wants to do this time around. Maybe he does want to go test the waters. But if he's in that $5 to $6 million range, and like you said, they are going to draft a young corner to be that number one guy, I agree with you. Cam Sutton is the perfect guy to sort of keep around to do that.
Absolutely. We'll keep all eyes and ears on the Steelers defense this week, especially with the news of TJ Watt supposedly being back. You can find out about that first at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where Ray, Jerry, Brian will all be at the facility all week long, getting you ready for Steelers Saints. This show, the North Shore Drive podcast, we'll be back Wednesday. We'll be talking more things about the middle of the week. By then, we'll probably know that TJ Watt is back or not. We'll be addressing other things, how the Steelers are looking going into this week, and we might get you also some Penguins talk just to see what the heck is going on with Crosby, Malkin, and the boys over there, because it's been a rough stretch for them as well. Ray, thanks again for joining me, Chris Carter, on the North Shore Drive podcast. It's always fun doing with you, man. We'll be back here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette again on Wednesday, but check every day on here for fresh content on our YouTube page, also on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts for all the podcasts, all the content from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Again, from Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, have a great start to your week. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.